Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Hogarth's Global Astrology. Know your planets, know yourself, or know your nation, know yourself. The two are interchangeable. All right, this evening now, this is a bit of a random one. Yeah, this is a bit of a random one. This is a little bit of an ambush, especially as I don't normally make videos on Tuesday. Oh, hello, people are joining me. And I want to give a big shout out to Nelliana, my dear friend Nelliana. We crossed paths. The serendipity was extraordinary. We crossed paths the other day, and I'm going to be visiting her soon in Ibiza. We used to work together once upon a time, way back in the day at Rocket Food and stuff, when we both used to work in events and stuff. We're talking well over 20 years ago now. Anyway, I was coming out of the butcher's store, taking a little detour, wasn't really planning to, decided I wanted some chicken supremes, went to my local butcher. There was a delay because the guy before me ordered basically a rib steak, and the female butcher, she had to get out a saw to cut through it. Yeah, why am I telling you this? This delayed me by a minute or two. And by the time that I'd ordered my Supremes and walked out the door, Nelliana saw me, we saw each other, and it was like, Nelly, Hoagie, yeah. And we caught up, had a drink, etc. And we just had a brilliant Zoom meeting today. So there's going to be some very, very interesting things happening in the future where I might be doing some retreats and stuff in Ibiza. Yeah, so that's giving you the I wasn't planning to tell you all of that, but that's giving you the overview. Yeah, early days yet, so watch this space. Now, one of the things when we caught up, and Nelliana is really into Western astrology and human design. Yeah, but of course, as you know, I am a Neo-Vedic astrologer. And when I was sharing, the Neo-Vedic perspective and stuff like that, she's like, oh my God. So really, I'm a Pisces, yeah, sun sign, etc. And we were going through, but it made so much sense to her. And I was explaining, because it'd been so long since I've seen Nelliana. I said, look, I'm a YouTuber now, and I do Neo-Vedic astrology and political tarot. And she's like, oh my goodness. And it was just one serendipitous thing after another. And I said, and her friend was there called Laya. So hello to you as well, who is a musician. And we kind of went out clubbing, the other day. And Laya played with her brass band, which does kind of like covers of like popular songs. Fabulous. Anyway, so we were chatting away, and I said, well, actually, I do charts for countries as well. They're like, really? I said, yes. They're like, please, you have to do Venezuela. Because that is where Nelliana and Laya are actually from. Yeah. And another mutual friend called Lissandro, who I've not seen in years. So I was like, okay, sure, I will do it. Yeah. And I said, look, I'm going to be able to do this on the 22nd. Yeah, today is the 22nd of April, 2025. And I was, after all this serendipity, I was saying to Nelliana, I said, look, everything happens for a reason. And her friend Laya has that exact phrase tattooed on her back. And I said, well, look, I'm going to do this show on Venezuela on April 22nd. She said, that's my favorite number. And she showed me a tattoo of the number 22 on her leg. And there was other serendipity and stuff like that. So I was like, I have to do it. Now, I was planning to do this earlier, but I started doing the research. Yeah, started making notes and research on Venezuela and why things have got to where they have got. And it is a fascinating story. Completely, I did not expect to learn the things that I learned. Yeah. So a few of you are here. Quite a lot of you actually here, over 100 of you. So Angela Locke is saying, oh my God. Jerry's saying hello, nice surprise. And what's that? Lisa's saying party on. And Sherry's saying, good old home week with your friend. Nice. Yes, wonderful. Like I said, Ibiza, watch this space, things to come. Potential retreats, etc. Really, really, really cool stuff. And everything happens for a reason. And then Dallas says, wow, I'm gladly surprised. Good to see you. All right, so let's dive in. Let's dive in with some of the basics. And what I'm going to do is we're going to look at Venezuela's chart to set up the context and the premise and to help us understand what happened. But as I was researching now, I looked up, you do the usual things. Obviously, you do your Google searches and stuff like that. But I spent quite a bit of time looking at various short documentaries. One was done by Al Jazeera. One was done by another network. I looked at the most recent video that I could find, which was from about 5 months ago, which is about the current state of Venezuela. So I got sort of like the historical context, then and what that was all about. Then the part with Hugo Chavez, yeah, that part, and what started to go wrong there, and where things currently stand now, but also why there is a potential warning here as well for the United States. Yeah, because as I was going through and learning what happened to Venezuela, it's not the same, but there are some parallels where I'm just like, yeah, that potentially needs to be looked at. So that will be a dovetailing of things together. Some of it I'm going to be reading through my notes. But one of the most important things we're going to look at in Venezuela's chart is the Dasha sequence. You may have heard me mention this before. And this is when in a country's life or a person's life, certain planets take dominant control. Yeah. So at the moment, the United States is in a Rahu Dasha, which is a very difficult dasha. It's not an easy one. I would say the second most difficult one is the Saturn Dasha. And this is something that Venezuela is experiencing. So I'll be talking about that and putting it all together. I'm going to maybe go for maybe 40 minutes, less than an hour. I always say that and ends up being an hour, but let's dive in. So thank you so much for everyone for joining me. This wasn't planned. So I'm going to read you off some of my notes just to give a context here. And then we're going to dig into the chart backwards and forwards. Yeah. And then I'll be reading your comments as well. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to drop some in. So one of these documentaries that I watched was this historian and sociology guy called Edgardo Landa. And he studies sociology, neoliberalism. He's like a historian, and he's from Venezuela and was talking about all of the tumultuous times. So let me just try and get the order right, because I've made some of my notes out of sequence. So the main part of the oil in Venezuela was discovered in the 1920s. Yeah, was discovered in the 1920s. So, or even you could even say, 1918, 1919, etc. And there was a dictator that was in charge at that time called Juan Vicente Gomez. And they say he was dictator from 1908 to 1935. So by this time, of course, Venezuela had discovered oil, and there's lots of it. One of the things I didn't know is that Venezuela has the most oil out of any nation on planet Earth. I didn't know that. I was like, really? Why did everything go wrong? But it will be explained. And he got immensely rich, but Standard Oil was one of the main American oil companies there, and they kept most of the profits. So what it means is that Gomez got a lot of the money, but it was the Standard Oil Company that took the majority of the profits, and the people of Venezuela really didn't get that much. Yeah, classics. Yeah, we all know scenarios like this is different forms of corruption. All right, let me carry on. And then there were some military coups and stuff like that. So in 1945, there was a revolution. So there was a revolution in Venezuela, and a more liberal kind of democratic government actually came in. And I put here, women were allowed to vote. There was unionization, etc. They started doing well. Yeah. And what happened was the people's lives started to improve, but then the government wanted to take a bit more control over the profits and stuff and wanted to share them more with the people. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. But in 1948, there was a military coup. Yeah. Which was basically supported by the oil company and America. Yeah. Yeah. We know this, you know, profits, etc., all of this kind of stuff. And they overthrew, which was the first democratically elected leader in Venezuelans history up until that point. I've forgotten what his name is. I shouldn't have written it down. Sorry about that. But basically, the good guys were overthrown. Then there was like military coups and dictatorships and stuff. And that military coup lasted for 10 years up until about 1958. Infrastructure was built, roads and all of that kind of stuff, but there was still a tremendous amount of suppression within the country. Yeah. And then what happened was there were public risings and protests, and they reached such an extent of protest. This was like in 1957 leading up to 1958, that the dictator got on a plane and left. So just so you know, particularly kind of dovetailing that with the USA right now, protest does work. And this is why you would see me saying on my channel, protest, protest, protest. If the numbers get big enough, if the pressure gets big enough, it really does have an effect. And someone's saying here, Kelly's saying, oligarchs tend to gut the resources and money for their own purpose. Indeed. So let me just read you a little bit more, and then we'll dive into the chart. So, and then there's a documentary which is called From Riches to Rags, Venezuela's Economic Crisis, The Big Picture. And this was shown on Al Jazeera, and this was from 7 years ago. So of course, not quite so relevant now, but I needed to find out what happened in between. Yeah. So it talks about the era of Hugo Chavez. Yeah. And he was born on the 28th of July, 1954, and he sadly died on the 5th of March, 2013. Now, this is very important. Remember that date, because when I actually look through Venezuela's Dasha sequence, you can see it there. And I do this for my clients as well. When I'm looking at their life, I see what planets cause what effects. Yeah. Anyways, so I put here, Hugo Chavez was a man of the poor, but he had oil. Yeah, he had access to the oil reserves. When he came to power, oil was $6 to $7 per barrel. Yeah, when he came to power. Oh, crikey, I should have put the day when he came to power. But basically, it was $6 to $7 per barrel. Yeah, at the time. By 2004 to 2005, it had become $100 per barrel. So it was extraordinary amounts increase, as you can imagine. So he decided on new forms of social policies and wanted to distribute oil revenue downwards, yeah, to the poor. He went to Cuba, and you see this video footage of him with the, what's his name? Oh my gosh, the famous dictator of Cuba. He's dead now. Oh my God, how can I forget? You know who I'm talking about. Military hat, beard, mustache, iconic, and his name's just gone out of my head. Forgive me. Anyway, so he went to Cuba to learn from them. So he improved healthcare, food access, education, created scholarships. These programs were called misiones. They were that was the name of the social programs. They looked at they did citizenship rights, identity cards, job training, breakfast clubs, university systems, and it was a comprehensive effort to improve the lives of the people. So there was a good intention there. There was a good intention there. But the whole economy relied very heavily on oil. Now, There's something you should know about certain signs of the zodiac. And when you see this, you're going to be like, oh my God. The sign of Scorpio, is associated with oil. Yeah, oil in particular, but it also deals with anything that's underground resources, etc. The Middle East in general is considered a scorpionic region. It has that energy of Scorpio. And of course, we have a lot of oil come out of the Middle East. But there is another planet which is associated with oil and petroleum and gas, and that is planet Neptune. Neptune can be the uber of oil and gas. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and look at this. It's going to be remarkable. Let's see here. Sherry says, do you think Venezuela will trade with El Salvador? Some of the men taken from there from F-45, that is supposedly an options being put to Venezuela. Wow. I could well imagine. There might well be something like that. That might be worth a card pull. Yes, green-eyed. What I'm going to do is I will save that comment, and I think we should pull some cards on it. And look at that here. And Katie said their prices are why MAGA voted for Trump. Aha. And then old Sylvia, yes, Katie, huge control by oil and gas. Here we are. And I think in regards, yeah, with MAGA, she's saying I'm fully responsible for where we are now. Castro, yes, thank you. How could I forget? You're one of the most iconic, whether you like him or hate him, but iconic. Everyone knows Castro. So yes, thank you for that. That's it. And then, and Green Eye Goddess is saying Hugo Chavez. Yes, he came into that interim. So basically, Hugo Chavez tried to do the best for the people. Now let's look at the chart, at least initially. Let's do present. Let's do share screen. I quite like these impromptus. Do you guys like these? These impromptu things here. I really, you know, it was, I just thought sometimes it's better just to do it live. All right, so here we go, folks. Hopefully you can see the cursor, yeah, on the chart. So I'm just moving it so you can see where I am. So I was checked in with Neliana to see when Venezuela was founded, and I double checked as well on the internet. And there were, it started as sort of like as Grand Colombia, etc. There were chops and changes, but in terms of as a concept of it as a country, which is the one which really counts in many ways. So Venezuelan independence was the 5th of July, 1811 at 3 p.m. Yeah, 3 p.m. And I chose the capital, Caracas. Yeah. Now, if we look here, now you remember what I was talking about Scorpio. Remember what I said about Scorpio and about Neptune. If you look here, you can see that Venezuela is a scorpionic nation. It has a Scorpio rising. Oil, that already talks about oil. Remember what I was talking about with the Middle East. If you look here, you'll also see Mars is in the first house. Mars is the ruler of Scorpio. So whenever a planet is in its own sign, it makes it much, much more powerful. Oh, and certain things are just starting to twig now. Mars is known as what? Yeah, Mars has many virtues. Mars is energy. Mars is passion. Mars is logic. Mars is problem solving. Mars is sport. He's also surgery as well. But Mars is also what? Military and war. There's been many military coups in Venezuela. There, the Mars is very strong. But look who Mars is with. Neptune, which is also another one of the indicators of oil. And remember I said Neptune can be the uber of oil. So here you have the ruler of the chart in the first house, adding very, very powerful, because here you've got the ruler of the chart in the first house. So this means this is a big part of the identity of Venezuela, and it's boosting the scorpionic elements. Unfortunately, Scorpio can also deal with things like corruption as well, but it also deals with transformation. But here it's also with Neptune. So is it any wonder that Venezuela has the biggest oil reserves on the planet by quite some distance, even more than Saudi Arabia? And I was like, when I found that out, I was like, oh my God. But then when I looked at the chart, I'm like, oh, it makes sense. Yeah. They hardly have to even refine it or do anything to it because it's just literally that pure oil. Yeah. So extreme good fortune there in a way. Now, what I want you to look at is Saturn over here. Yeah. In the second house. Now, what is the second house? The second house deals with money, resources of all kinds. It deals with food, education, nourishment. It also deals with savings. Yeah, savings. Now, here you see Saturn is with the moon. Now, the moon deals with the public. Yeah, the nation. It's when you're looking at a chart of a nation, the moon, the placement of the moon will tell you about the people in the collective. Now, technically, the moon here is actually strong when it's in the sign of Sagittarius and here. So it means that people can be very idealistic, interested in freedom and rights and politics. Yeah, Sagittarius is a very, very political sign. Let's not forget the rising sign of America with the Declaration of Independence chart is Sagittarius. Yeah. But remember, the shadow of Sagittarius can also deal with fanaticism, and it can also deal with illusions and delusions. Yeah, things like that. Now, Saturn is a reality check planet. However, Saturn and the moon are not friends. Whenever you see Saturn with the moon, there is always a problem. Yeah, there's a problem. But so store that in the mind. Yeah, store that in the mind. Now, what's important is if we look down here, you see where there's these letters here, S-A-M-E, S-A-M-E, S-A-K-E, etc. So that is the Mahadasha sequence, the Vinsatori Mahadasha sequence. It shows when a planet's influence is most affecting a person or country. Now, remember when I said the Rahu Dasha is probably the most difficult. But quite a close second is the Saturn Dasha. The Saturn Dasha lasts for 19 years. I've been through this one myself. Yeah, this is probably what made me an astrologer in the end, and it was tough. Yeah, 19 years. You know, I'm not even that old. 19 years, basically. Almost half of my life was a Saturn Dasha. Yeah, for me. Anyway. So their Saturn Dasha began on the 1st of June 2006. Yeah, but I'm going to make reference to this because then you're going to see how things got activated. What's also important to understand for anyone that is a Scorpio rising, it means Venus rules the 7th house, which deals with relationships, but it's not just relationships. It also, 7th house also deals with legalities, laws. It also deals with imports and exports, commerce, business, lawyers, judges. So remember that, yeah? Imports, exports, commerce, business. It also deals with foreign lands and open enemies. The 12th house, as many of you know, will deal with losses, but it also deals with hospitals. It deals with prisons. But it also deals with ashrams, the land of far, far away. Everything that's abroad. It also deals with water, oceans, islands. Can also deal with oil as well because it's relative to the 12th house Pisces, and Neptune is the co-ruler of Pisces. Yeah, so Venus rules 7th house, 12th house, and this is really important. So what I'm going to do is let me just stop sharing there for now. and go back to you all, and I'm going to read the rest of what happened, and then you can see the triggers. Yeah, and I'm going to play you a little video clip. All right, how are we doing, folks? You enjoying the show so far? Let's just see here. Who else is here? And then Valerie saying, hi, Hoagie. Hi, Sharon. Thanks for this update. Love from Arizona. So nice to see you. Okay, so here we go. So remember, when Hugo Chavez started off in power, oil was $6 to $7 per barrel. Then by 2004, 2005, it went to $1,000 per barrel. Something as well you need to know as well, Neptune, by the way, and Pluto, but Neptune in particular can deal with extreme losses. Pluto deals with extremes as well. Pluto can be like plutocrats, so much money that can't be counted, or it can deal with massive debts. Yeah, so I want you to remember that. Anyways, so let's just see. So yes, he began these very generous programs, yeah, because the oil price was high. He was like, right, I can do these social reforms, and he started to renationalize things as well. So it was a socialist program effectively, but big scale, big scale. So yes, so he began nationalizing oil and gas, but he also started nationalizing the banks. So so imagine banks are international, independent, and he bought Santander Bank and other banks. So they all started to come under the government's control. He thought it was fine, I put here, because of the oil, but relied too heavily on imports, which destroyed production capacity of Venezuela. So because they had such a high, the oil price was doing well, but almost all of the GDP was coming from oil. It was like 95% of it. And that's literally having what? All of your eggs in one basket. And I learned a new term, which is, I didn't know this. I'm sure many of you will know it, which is called the Dutch disease. And the Dutch disease is a reference to a country that maybe suddenly finds an incredible amount of resource. And what happens is everyone rushes in, their currency starts going up because they've got this extreme resource, and they can sometimes hollow themselves out. Yeah. Or they become lopsided, or all their eggs go into one basket, and it's called the Dutch disease. I'd have to, in fact, let me just give you the proper definition, because mine was a bit garbled. So, because this concept is important, let's do present, share screen, and do the tab. So just so you can see, because I had to learn it, here we go. The Dutch disease refers to the negative economic consequences that can arise from a sudden and large increase in income. Yeah, or like oil, often due to the discovery or exploitation of natural resources. This influx of wealth can lead to a depreciation of other sectors, particularly those involved in manufacturing or exports, as the national currency appreciates, making exports more expensive and less competitive. So you see, it causes an imbalance. Here's a more detailed explanation. It says the core problem: the Dutch disease is a paradox where a good event like finding oil can actually harm the overall economy. The currency effect: the discovery of resources typically leads to a surge in demand for the country's currency, causing it to become stronger. Impact on exports: a stronger currency makes the country's exports more expensive to foreign buyers, potentially reducing demand and hurting export-dependent industries. Deindustrialization and other impacts: the focus on the resource sector can also lead to the shift away from manufacturing and other trade sectors, potentially causing deindustrialization and reliance on tradable goods. Now, in a way, America is sort of in that position in quite a lot of the developed world, because obviously a lot of us have outsourced to China, but manufacturing in America is an issue. But America is able to manage that because it's currently the global reserve currency. But do you see how there is an issue with deindustrialization, which is part of the arguments of Make America Great Again and MAGA, etc.? which obviously Duck L'Orange is kind of undermining anyways. Examples: the Netherlands' discovery of natural gas in the 1960s, along with similar episodes in other resource-rich countries, provided real-world examples for this phenomena. Yeah, so that explains the phenomenon. So I hope you found that interesting. All right, I'm going to read on and then we'll go back to the charts. In fact, no, I'll share a little video clip with you. Anyway, his socialist model created mirror organizations. Yeah, so you had private industry and the government mirroring each other, so everything was doubled up, which increased costs significantly and led to huge borrowing. Yeah, the national debt six-tupled, so it went up by 6 times. Wow. Yeah. And let's just see here. Someone's saying, Sherry, what prison is worse, Venezuela or El Salvador? They're about the same. That one I don't know. I couldn't answer that, but I would imagine maybe similar. In fact, actually, Venezuela is probably worse, yeah, because of the struggles with food and stuff. And anyways, so as the oil price increased, money was not put aside into a sovereign wealth fund. And I think that's probably the main key. Saudi Arabia has one, Norway has one. They say that everyone in oil knows that oil prices are cyclical. So by 2012, oil accounted for 95% of Venezuela's exports. So 95% means all the eggs are in one basket. Prices were over $100 per barrel. So the money, though, was still coming in. Yeah, so you can see that excitement, the huge abundance of wealth. But as oil prices peaked, Hugo Chavez's health declined. You can actually see that I'm going to show you where in Venezuela's chart how the planetary energy changed, and Hugo Chavez's change in health were symbolic of the change of fortunes in the country. It's fascinating. Anyway, so, and he got cancer. Sadly, he got cancer, and he was diagnosed in July 2011, but the lump was found in June 2011. So I want you to remember that. The markets thought Venezuela was borrowing too much and decided to stop lending. So the money was cut off. So what you got to remember is this is foreign lands stopped lending money. Yeah, stopped lending money. And then the economy started to go down and corruption took more effect. And then Chavez died on March 5th, 2013. Now I can show you how this correlates with the date. So I'm going to share again. Let's go back in. We're going to go back to the chart. And I want you to remember those things that I've said. And let's get back in here. Now, so we need to remember from the 1st of June 2006, Venezuela entered its Saturn Dasha, which was always going to be challenging. That means it was going to be 19 years of challenge. However, the Saturn Dasha, if done well, can create extraordinary things as well. It depends how the energy, yeah, is looked after. Anyway, so if we look down here, if we go to what we're looking for are the dates of around July 2011, June, July 2011, or that 2011 period, we can see what planetary effects were taking place. So if we look down here, you see, let's go here. So you can see that at that point, Venezuela was in its Saturn Mercury Dasha. And then it went into Saturn K2. So Saturn and Mercury are both friends. Yeah, they're considered friends. So when you see them together in a house or aspecting each other or in a Dasha sequence, that's normally quite positive. So you can see here Saturn Mercury, and that lasted from the 4th of June 2009 till the 12th of February 2012. So in that time, the oil price was continuing to go up. Remember, the peak was 2012. Yeah. So Saturn is in the second house of money. So because this Dasha is active, wherever that planet sits and whatever houses it rules become active. So Saturn sits in the second house of what? Money, resources, asset classes of all kinds, food, education. Yeah. So Saturn here is bringing this wealth and all of this stuff. The houses that Saturn rules is the third house, which deals with skills, commerce, business, etc., artisans, and the fourth house, which deals with what? The homeland. Remember, the fourth house is the homeland, real estate, the resources of the people. And this is why, in regards to America, where I was talking about that, the rude awakening happening in what? The fourth house of the United States. So I said, unfortunately, there's going to be huge transformations. What? In America, look what's happening. Yeah. Especially since the 29th of March. So what it means is in the Saturn Dasha, the fourth house was also becoming active. And do you remember I was talking about Pluto? Pluto also deals with oil. But remember, he deals with extremes. That's where we get the name plutocrat from as well. So it deals with oligarchy, plutocrats, extremes of wealth, but also extremes of debt. Extremes of debt. So Saturn as a planet for Venezuela is a difficult planet. It's a difficult planet because it's activating the fourth house, because that's where that Pluto was. So it's a bit unfortunate that Saturn triggered that. Yeah. So that in a way was laying that energy. Now, if you look here, K2 is here. Remember, I call K2 snip, snip. Whatever K2 is next to it can deal with an ending or a separation from that thing. So you can see it was like a time trap was there, where K2 was going to separate Venezuela from something, maybe from its oil, from its wealth, and maybe it's cause extreme what? Debt. If we look here, Chiron is here as well, which is what? The wounded healer. Whoa! So this was all bubbling in the background. So, but what happened though? K2, you could say, really, because funny enough, K2, they say, doesn't care about wealth, but the nodes of the moon create extremes. So here, K2 in a way boosted, or that extremely high oil price in the, do you see here? Because you see Saturn K2 it starts from the 12th of February 2012. So this is when the oil price would have really started reaching its peak in the early part of 2012. But then when we go into Saturn Venus, things get really difficult. And so in this time period, yeah, from that 2009 to 2012, in that K2 Saturn period, let's see, when was he diagnosed? So basically in that time period, this is when Hugo Chavez would have started getting ill. Yeah, he was diagnosed with cancer, something in the groin area, something like that, if I remember correctly. But it's when the Saturn Venus kicks in, that's when it really starts to go pear-shaped. So the way it is, when you're looking at a person's life, the main Dasha period is this part here, Saturn. And then you see here, it's also Saturn, but the drivers change and they drive in their own style, and the houses they rule in a person's chart activate. So remember what I was saying, even though Saturn and Venus are friends, for all Scorpio rising, Venus rules the 7th house of imports and exports and business. Yeah, do you remember why I was saying that? Imports, exports, business. But it also deals with legalities and open enemies. Venus also rules the 12th house, which is also what? A house of losses, prisons, hospitals, all of that kind of stuff. The positive, of course, is ashrams and international travel and all of that kind of thing. So here we start to have quite a difficult combination. because Saturn is with the moon, and Saturn and the moon are not friends. Remember, the moon represents the people. Guess what Saturn does, especially to the moon? He starves the moon. This is called starvation. Saturn starves whatever planet he's with, even his friends, but he starves them less. With the moon, full starvation. The moon is the people. So what happened is, as you can see here, they went into their Saturn-Venus Dasha on the 13th of March, 2013. Oh, yeah, this is when things really started to go wrong, because what? The economy wasn't doing well. And when Hugo Chavez got sick, the international money started to dry up. Here you see Venus with Jupiter. These are two benefics together, but guess what? They're not friends. And you're thinking, well, how can two sweet planets not be friends? Surely they have a lot in common. And they do. But the reason why they're not friends is this. Jupiter is an idealistic planet. Ideally, he likes to be in fire signs or water signs, not in Earth. Something funny happens to Jupiter when he's in Taurus, because the shadow of Jupiter is greed. Taurus is a very materialistic sign, but it also deals with Gaia, Mother Earth. I actually refer to Taurus as the Gaia portion. Venus is here in its own sign, extremely powerful. So it means what? The Earth is very, very generous. But sometimes this can be what? Too much of a good thing. Venus with Jupiter can be bad because it's too much of a good thing, which takes us back to the concept of what? The Dutch disease. It was too abundant. The oil was too abundant, but also as well, it also deals with imports and exports. Venezuela was importing too much. Venus is also a planet of food. They were importing a tremendous amount of food and resources. But then when the Saturn-Venus Dasha kicked in, Saturn is what? Rules, regulations, restrictions. He starts starving the people. The international money started to dry up. And then in the house, which is also activated, the 12th house, 7th house activated by Venus. 12th house activated by Venus. 2nd house activated by Saturn because he's sitting there, but it's also 3rd house and 4th. So you can see all sorts of things started to happen at once. Once they went into the Saturn-Venus Dasha, the 12th house got activated, and any planets in an activated house also activate too. This is what I found. And for Venezuela, it was Uranus, which is the what? The planet of sudden shocks and surprises. Uranus, guess what, is not a good planet for finances. I mean, he can give you sudden wealth, yeah, if you manage it well. But what it meant is, because the 12th house is what? Losses. Sudden shocks and losses from the land of far, far away. The investors started to cut the money. Do you see? And this led to a spiral. And then sadly, as we know, on when did he pass? It was the 5th. Oh gosh. So Hugo Chavez died on March 5th, 2013. Yeah, March 5th. So you can see that was still covering the Saturn K2 period. Snip, snip. Towards the end of it, they lost, sadly, you know, Chavez died. And the market, everything, the energy shifted. And then after that, the Saturn and Sun aren't friends. It just got progressively worse and worse. Yeah. So if I stop sharing on that one there. So let's see how I'm doing on time. Look at that. Gosh, 44 minutes already. So I hope that's given you a good overview there. Now, what I'm going to play you is a video clip. And it's just extraordinary how these things can transpire. So let me just do present. And I'm going to play you a bit of a video clip, which was part of my research for this show today. All right, I'm just going to play it from here. I'm going to let it run maybe for a couple of minutes. All right.
Or in the ground, and crude would shoot out of it. What really tipped the scales was spending, and more specifically, how this money was spent. Corruption is a massive problem at all levels, from small bribes to local law enforcement, all the way up to the national government, and with so much money up for grabs, there was an incentive to line people's pockets. The most desirable jobs in the country became government jobs funded by oil revenues because they had the means to embezzle it with ease. Billions of dollars in official account transfers remain unaccounted for to this day, and that's to say nothing of the more mundane corruption happening at an individual level. A story in 2006 revealed that a select group of Venezuelan bankers profited from the acquisition of Argentinian bonds by the Venezuelan government at the expense of the national treasury.
Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Didn't a certain Marjorie Taylor Greene do the same thing? What are some of the people in Congress doing now? Just so you see, it's not the same, but you can see why I'm like, oh, we need to talk a bit about America. So I just wanted to give you that little bit there. It will continue.
Then there are these aforementioned social programs that look great on the surface. The government policies were essentially very populist and involved basically giving oil money away to keep the favour of the people. Of course, this isn't bad by itself. After all, those natural resources do belong to the people, but it made the country very dependent on oil prices, especially when it had to adhere to OPEC quotas. This meant that when times were good and oil prices remained high, Venezuela managed to brute force its GDP up until 2014. But this changed dramatically when a few things started going wrong very quickly. After rising for more than a decade, oil revenues fell by 93% between 2012 and 2020.
So did you hear that? Oil revenues fell by 93% between 2012 and 2020. That was also coinciding as well with that Dasha shift that I was showing you. Do you remember I said from 2012? That was sort of like the peak, and then going into 2013, particularly from the 23rd of March 2013 to the 23rd of May 2016, yeah, that was a very difficult time. The oil price started to crash, but remember, 95% of the of Venezuelans' exports was oil. That was one of the chief money makers. Yeah, it was the only one.
During the same period, per capita income declined by 72%. By 2014, inflation had reached 69%, the highest in the world at the time, and in 2018, inflation skyrocketed to over 130,000%.
Did you hear that? In 2018, inflation reached 130,000%. I didn't even know that was possible. I didn't even know that was possible.
As of 2023, it's still at 190%. Relying almost completely on oil was always going to present challenges, but the nation's problems had more to do with how the Venezuelan government handled and continues to handle what should have been a golden opportunity. Of course, this is where we bring up Norway, the gold standard in managing oil wealth. Both countries possess government-owned oil industries, but the key difference is that Norway has used its oil to generate long-lasting wealth, while Venezuela did the macroeconomic equivalent of winning the lottery, only to spend it all on a mansion and fancy cars. Norway still uses its oil revenues to fund generous social programs, but the only difference is that they put it into an investment fund first. Instead of using oil profits to line pockets and give its populace immediate fleeting satisfaction, Norway set up the largest sovereign wealth fund in the entire world. Today it's worth $1.6 trillion.
$1.6 trillion. Norway's wealth fund market.
Which translates as $295,000 per Norwegian citizen. Norway also imposed a rule that any spending from the oil fund can only be as high as the expected return, known as Norway's 3% rule. This means that the country isn't technically spending their non-renewable oil revenues, they're actually spending their conservative investment returns. It also has restrictions where the fund can't invest in what the country sees as immoral, which ironically includes fossil fuels. Now, compare that to Venezuela. With no restrictions like the 3% rule, the Venezuelan government might have been able to give a lot of money back to the people in a short amount of time, but the cost of winning public and regional approval created a crippling deficit. Finally, choosing a personal wealth fund that only benefits a few unsavory groups instead of a sovereign.
See that? Why wealthy Venezuelans are building mansions in a national park. Yeah, I'll just play a little bit more then.
Wealth fund that benefits everyone long after the oil revenue dries up creates an extremely unfair balance of wealth and power. And that's really the cause of a lot of Venezuelan struggle. How power is distributed and how power is used.
Right there. So again, that's what corruption, yeah? How power is distributed and how power is used. Let me know if I hope you guys heard that. Okay. Wow, there's 243 of you here. So you can see why I'm drawing those parallels. Now, will this last forever in Venezuela? We're going to look at the chart, but let's talk now about some of the things that we see happening in the United States, which is kind of giving me a bit of concern. We see what? Oligarchy. Yeah, oligarchy, big business, big companies influencing. If we think of Elon Musk influencing the elections, yeah, and then, you know, getting involved, trying to do this, that, and the other. Now, of course, he's hurt himself a lot because, as we know, everything that Trump touches turns to ash, but they never learn. They all think that they're immune. But when we think of Marjorie Taylor Greene's insider trading, etc., they're flooding the zone with so much stuff that is hard to even keep track of it all. But do you see how there are parallels there? It's not the same, but there are certain similarities. And this is what happens, as someone was saying in the comments, when oligarchy get too much control, they just hollow the country out. Yeah, hollow the country out. And of course, I don't want that to happen to the United States. Old Silver says, Norway takes care of their people. Indeed, they do. So, but you see, it's all about policies. Yeah, it's all about policies. Hugo Chavez in many ways had the right idea, and he did. Obviously, he did some good. Yeah, invested in these programs, wanted to bring the money down to the people. But what happened is that all of the eggs were in one basket. All of the eggs were in one basket. There wasn't enough diversification, and there was waste. Things were being doubled up, and really the corruption wasn't fully dealt with. So when the oil price started to go down, and it went down dramatically, as shown in that documentary, by 93%, if your whole economy is 95% reliant on oil, and that asset class devalues by 93%, then you have a massive problem, isn't it? Massive problem. And then here we are. Green-eyed goddess says, hasn't SCOTUS been involved in insider trading as well? Absolutely, I'm sure they have. Here, USA government programs are being gutted. Yeah, so you can see why I drew that parallel. Now, what I want to do is, because I'm sure Nelliana, when she watches this, she's going to be, well, how do things get better? Yeah, so we're going to go back in the chart again. We're going to look at maybe where there could be some transformation coming up for Venezuela, which could be happening very soon. And just to let you know as well, like the rankings, yeah, I wrote down the rankings of oil. So Venezuela has the most oil. They've got, because of the corruption. Oh, let me plug in my, yeah. So I just plugged in my laptop. Because of the corruption, and because 6.1 million people apparently have left, I think even the IMF and stuff like that, these global bodies have stopped actually taking data from Venezuela, because they said they can't even rely on the figures. But there's not enough people there because of the brain drain to even pump the oil. So Venezuela is number one in terms of barrels in reserve, 299,953,000. Then Saudi Arabia is 266,578,000. Canada is third. Canada is the third largest oil producer in the world, 170,863,000. Then Iran, 157,000. Then Iraq, 105th, 143,000. Kuwait, 143 million. Those are millions. Kuwait, 101 million. UAE, 97,000. Russia, 80,000. Libya, 48,000, and Nigeria, 37,000. I could have given you a bit more, but basically Venezuela has 18% of the world's oil reserve, 18.2%. Wow. Yeah. But now, such is the corruption and the brain drain, they can't even pump the oil to sell it to try and get the economy back. Extraordinary, isn't it? So when will things change for Venezuela? And then let's talk a little bit more about the warning cautionary tale for the United States. So let's just, I hope you're finding this presentation interesting, guys. Let's do it entire screen. Let's just do that again. So, okay. Remember I was talking about the Saturn Dasha being the most difficult, yeah? But could this be good news for Venezuela? If we look here, their Dasha sequence as a nation is about to change. Their Saturn Dasha of 19 years is about to end. They will go into their Mercury Dasha. I've started my Mercury Dasha because it goes in a fixed order, and my Mercury Dasha has been a lot better than my Saturn one, yeah? But I'm grateful. I'm grateful for Saturn and what he taught me. And the Saturn Jupiter is supposed to be the best part. But anyway, if we look here, they will go into Mercury on the 1st of June, 2025. Today is the 23rd of April, or 22nd going into the 23rd of April. So basically in a couple of, well, in about 6 weeks, let's say 6-7 weeks, their Dasha sequence is going to change. Now, what's going to happen? It means Mercury is going to become more dominant, will become the dominant energy. And here, for all Scorpios, Mercury is the 8th house lord. Now, Mercury is one of the planets that's considered the only planet to pick up strength in the 8th house, unless it's Mars in its own sign or something. So that could be stronger. Mercury rules the sign of Gemini. Gemini deals with commerce, business, and it's also there with the sun. The sun deals with leadership. The 8th house is the house of what? Sex, death, and rock and roll. It also deals with other people's money. It can deal with the dark. It can deal with crime and corruption, which of course is absolutely gone completely out of control in Venezuela. But it could mean that there might be some kind of plot developing. I think maybe, could this be maybe even another coup? Yeah, because the sun, the leadership, is in the 8th house, but Mercury is there and it's going to become activated, which means the new kinds of leadership may be activated. I then look to see Rahu, the north node of the moon, sits in Leo. The sun is the ruler of Leo. And then I even looked at the nakshatra, which is this Rahu, the manifest point of destiny, is in Uttara Falguni. Uttara Falguni is ruled by the sun. So what this means to me is that there is likely, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen right on that day, yeah, which is the, where is it? The 1st of June, 2025. But around that time, the energy will start to change, and there could be potentially maybe a new leader or a transformation of the leadership. Could it be that Maduro sees the light in some kind of way, or there's some kind of exchange, or something happens which is to do with other people's money, other people's resources? I hope he's not going to try and invade, you know, what was the country next door? Was it Guatemala? Guy, oh crumbs! You know, he wanted to. They were talking about taking the resources of that smaller country. I hope it's not something like that. But there is an element here of transformation. Gemini is a sign of business, so this says to me that there might be some change in the leadership because the sun is here and Mercury is there. But it's to do with commerce, business, communication, something like that. Yeah. And it will make an impact on the leadership because this Rahu is sitting in the 10th house and the sun is the ruler of the 10th house and goes to the 8th. So this, I think, is why there's been so many coups as well, because the symbol of leadership is in the 8th house of transformation. Yeah. And coups and scandals and different things like that. So you can see that as a blueprint there. But could there be maybe Maduro, maybe he's overthrown, or does Maduro maybe come up with a new business idea for the country? We'll have to see. I hope it manifests in the positive. But change is potentially coming for Venezuela. And if there's one positive thing I can say is that at least the Saturn Dasha is coming to the end, which is one of the most difficult, second most difficult. Mercury Dasha tends to be a good one, particularly if the Mercury is strong, and it is strong here in its own sign in the 8th house. Yeah. And I'm wondering if it is it combust? I can't tell on this one here. Let me just see if that Mercury is combust. See, let's take a look at Mercury. No, it's not combust. So I think, you know, there's potential for positive change to come to Venezuela. So Leliana, if you're watching, let's see how that energy plays out. Will he try and use it for good, or will he be overthrown and someone come in? All right, so let me stop the share there, and let's talk a little bit about the United States. Oh, I've hit an hour. Guyana, that's the one. Thank you. Guyana, thank you. Freedom Girl said, I ordered his book. I need to learn. Thank you so much. I might be doing an ooh, and then Michael said, I saw that Japan is pushing the water-powered motor. Good. And then, how do I say that? Mered? I hope I've said that right. This is fascinating. She said, thank you so much. So, okay, so let's put this together. We see, I hope I've given a decent overview of why Venezuela got into the predicament that it did. And what I'll try and remember to do is, in the video description, I will put those video links, those resources that I used for this research. Let's hope on the 1st of June, when their Mercury Dasha starts, so it could be happening even now, but definitely after, as that Mercury Dasha unfolds, the energy of Mercury will bring transformation, because it is sitting in the 8th house. And it's also the lord of the 11th house, which deals with great gains and friends, powerful connections and stuff like that. So maybe there might be some kind of outside influence. Because of its history, it's more likely to be some kind of coup, but it could even be maybe some kind of company that takes over, or maybe Maduro has some kind of bright idea. I don't know, but it looks like transformation is coming. So what does this mean for the United States? It means it has to tread very, very carefully. These are very precarious times. Before everything unraveled, Venezuela was, you know, they thought they pulled it off. Yeah, it was considered starting to become one of the leading nations in the world. It was like in the top 10, maybe even top 5 at one point in terms of economics, because I think it peaked at 340 something billion or something like that. But we can see what happens when corruption comes in, when things are mismanaged. Things can rapidly decline. So, of course, there are warnings here for the United States, particularly where we're seeing how things are being run now. So just to close, I would say is, if there's something that we learn as well from Venezuela, is that protest does matter, at least in those early stages when everyone was protesting against the government, and eventually the dictatorship fell. But it's also important to understand that leadership matters. We know this anyway, many of you watching. And how the leaders behave ultimately is where the nation goes. So we have to see what is happening. Hopefully, the world can kind of beat some sense into Trump in regards to these tariffs and stuff like that I read on before. And they might be paused or reduced, maybe not made as harmful. But that is also a cautionary tale as well, isn't it? Of how badly things can go wrong when corruption, you know, takes over. A Magical Mermaid says, we see you, Venezuela, which is good. Let's see. Sherry saying, means the orange one needs to go. Yes, he does. Green-Eyed Goddess says, unfortunately, our current US leadership does not have careful in its vocabulary. Indeed. And Old Silver saying, corruption destroys. So don't forget to protest, everyone. That's really, really important. And then Karen says, thank you. She's been member for 25 months. Love your impromptus. Thank you. Right, now I've gone over an hour there. I hope you found that interesting. And please, of course, be sure to like and subscribe and share and all that jazz. And yeah, it was an impromptu, but I'm really glad that I did that research and learned more about the history of Venezuela and how things can go wrong. But if we think, just ending on the more positive note for Venezuela, those resources are there. If the leadership changes, that oil can be pumped again. And if the funds coming in are not mismanaged, then Venezuela could rejuvenate itself as well. So do you see, let's not forget, Scorpio is also the ultimate sign of rebirth. Yeah, because it's associated with the phoenix. Yeah, it's the scorpion, but it's also the phoenix. It goes through the stages. It goes to the scorpion, the eagle, and the dove, and the phoenix. So out of the ashes, something new can come. So let's see what happens for Venezuela over the coming months and years as that Mercury Dasha begins to kick in. And either way, it's probably going to be better than what they've had now. So let's hope they're able to get a handle on that corruption and stuff. I wish Venezuela the best. And for the United States, cautionary tale, isn't it? Cautionary tale. So I will leave it there. And then our pet says, your third eye is wide open, Hogarth. Oh, thank you. I hope you can see it gleaming. Yeah. And magical moment. Yes, Scorpio is very resilient. Yeah, Scorpio can come back from anything, they say. Really, it can. It can rejuvenate from anything. And people saying, thank you. Thanks so much for watching. And Diane is saying, and thanks for all the work you put into the show. Well done. Thank you. And then thanks, Sergey. Love the chart readings. Got some lovely applause there. Thank you from Pet and Paisley. So thank you. Right. I'm going to leave it there. Otherwise, I'll be talking for ages and ages. Hundreds of you came to watch. I'm amazed. I'm always amazed at these things. So I will leave it there. Sherry's gives in some love hearts. Thank you. And Jerry's saying very insightful, much appreciated. So I will leave it there and I will see you. Oh gosh, tomorrow, isn't it? That's the next Hogelish, isn't it? So I'll see you tomorrow for Hogelish. Big love. Please like and subscribe and share. And I hope you found that interesting. All right. Bye-bye for now. Cheers.